Hello, everybody. Welcome to another T.REX talk. I come to you now as Isaac the White at the turning of the tide. I was telling Charles I'm not sure why I wore the shirt today. I guess it was just for all the people who were complaining about the stream being overexposed on the last live stream. So today we're going to be talking about force multipliers. And since that's a complicated and long topic, we will barely scratch the surface. We'll talk about random little bits of gear instead of the overall larger picture stuff, because that's what I tend to do when I talk about things. For those of you who are listening to this live stream as an audio podcast, I'm going to try to describe stuff in a way that doesn't leave you completely confused as to the random stuff that I'm holding up. But for those of you who are watching the video, obviously you can see things, and we're not going to hold up any firearms. Firearms are absolutely force multiplying devices. They take objects and then they apply considerable force to them so that kinetic and ballistic magic happens. But YouTube won't let us hold those up on live stream, so we're going to just sort of refer obliquely to that particular type of force multiplying device. So yeah, welcome to another talk. We do want to get into this topic. We talk about a lot of things at T.REX Arms are geared around equipment. It's not that we don't talk about training. It's just that oftentimes we talk about training without talking about gear, and then other times we make gear and get caught up in talking about gear without talking about training. Those things go very well together. They go together like, I don't know, like there's a holster, like a two-part holster, Chad, that kind of goes together like this.
Whatever are you talking about?
It's a metaphor for things that go well together. I don't know. It's no, that would have been, you know, it's only our largest product launch ever. I forgot to bring one into the room. So one of the things that I do want to talk about is what force multiplication is all about. We're not just talking about combat here. Generally speaking, when people in this particular community talk about force multiplication, they are talking specifically about combat effectiveness. J.R. White's definition of a force multiplier, or what force multipliers are methods that allow for an increase of striking power without increasing the number of combat troops in the military. So that's, I think, a great definition, but it's very much focused on military. We're going to be talking about military stuff, but also emergency response stuff. So, absolutely. David, if you want to come over here and talk about this stuff, I'm just getting into the beginning definitions. So grab yourself a microphone. I got lots of, oh, you brought force multiplication gear with you? And force multiplication books. While you get yourself,
books,
while you,
radios, and laptops.
While you get yourself mic'd up, I want to talk a little bit about this book. This book is called Jungle Snafus and Remedies. And this is a weird niche book. This is our grandfather's favorite book. He was an instructor during World War II, and then he actually fought in the Korean War. And he experienced a number of logistical snafus, equipment, training, morale, mobility, reputation, technology, geography, weather, recruitment, training, experience, military strategy, tactics, intelligence, and deception failures. And those annoyed him because
he was an intelligence officer.
He was an intelligence officer, and winning the war was, a priority. And there were a lot of various snafus. So this was his favorite book, and this book is not about Korea. It is about lessons learned from Vietnam, primarily, I believe.
Well, he has stuff all the way from World War II. So the author of this book was a geological engineer, explorer type guy, and he did oil exploration in Panama. And because he had a lot of experience working in the jungle, basically, when World War II kicked off, they brought him in as sort of a subject matter expert on jungle warfare and jungle fighting conditions and things like that. And so it starts there, and it works his way through his career working with the military, basically talking about uniforms and tents and hammocks and all kinds of different things that improve the life of soldiers, improve the effectiveness of soldiers in field conditions.
Yes, and that's a really important thing. So the list that I just read off to you is another well accepted list of what force multiplying things are. Your combat troops are more effective based on their morale. So you get a multiplying factor if morale is up. mobility, reputation, technology, geography, weather, recruitment. Actually, that's the best way to multiply your forces, if you just actually multiply your forces. And then training and experience, obviously, is a tremendous force multiplier. It improves effectiveness and capability, strategy, tactics, intelligence, deception. These are all really important things, but the really basic logistical stuff is important. And in this book, Kearney has a lot of examples of things where just really basic stuff like having the wrong clothing, having the wrong shoes was hugely problematic for the job that the soldiers were trying to get done. Even just the self-cleaning soles of the that classic Vietnam jungle boot is a huge deal for safety, but also for being combat effective in actual firefights. Being able to have traction is kind of important. It's could be the difference between life or death. So there's little teeny stuff that goes into this larger overall picture.
And there's a lot of different examples of places where you can see people showing up to do stuff improperly equipped. There was we used to do volunteer firefighting stuff. Yeah, there's examples in there, but even in just civil stuff, like I did some flood response, but I'll use an example that I wasn't present for. There was a boy that got lost in the middle of winter. He just walked off and disappeared. He was like 3 years old or 4 years old. And there was this huge response from people to go out and look for him. And there were literally, one of my friends who worked that scene was like, yeah, there were people showing up. And this is the deep winter in flip-flops and shorts and planning to just go into the forest to help search thousands of acres of territory. And he said what would happen is because they were so woefully unprepared or ignorant of the conditions they were going into, they would get a couple hundred yards into the trees, suffer a sprained ankle, and now resources that should have been going to the actual search and rescue effort are being diverted to get these fat slobs out of the woods.
Right. So equipment matters, and in something like search and rescue, obviously large numbers of people searching large areas is a good thing, but it requires that you actually are able to be effective. And sometimes there are tools like thermal cameras, tools like drones, or tools like dogs. A small number of people with dogs actually more effective for SAR stuff sometimes than large numbers of people. So dogs are, for certain missions, very much a force multiplier.
Yeah. And I think the key is to start, and maybe you already covered this, but the key is to identify what is it you're trying to accomplish, what is the mission that you're setting out to consider.
I didn't start with that.
And that's where we see this in the firearms industry kind of all the time. What I would call gimmick guns, like shotguns that are just really absurd. And there's people that suddenly have this idea that they need to be equipped to defend themselves, and like, that's noble idea. They see that things are unstable, and so they go out to get equipped, and they do it in just like a B-movie prepper sort of way. And they buy equipment or stuff or whatever that is not well thought through. And they think, well, now I've got my shotgun, I'm all done. And they really couldn't be further from the truth if that's actually what they're trying to prepare for. And that's where, in a lot of ways, the biggest force multiplier, I guess that's why we both bought books, is knowledge. And I heard someone recently say, like, you can't buy knowledge, and actually you can. You totally can. There's people, like, that's Block Hack Down, this is 13 Hours. These are just two very popular, contemporary,
popular and extremely easy to read books. Something like this that's full of very dense institutional and practical knowledge about really specific, basic textile stuff is hard to get through. Stuff like this is easy. This is such an easy book to read that it got turned into a movie.
It reads almost like a novel, but it's not. It's a this was for a while on the various required reading lists in the U.S. military. I don't know if this one has made it there yet, but I honestly think it should.
And both of these books are unique. It's interesting we brought these in. These are both books about force multiplication, where you have groups of people who are equipped for. They have different levels of being equipped. So in Black Hawk Down, you have people who are equipped for one mission, and they find themselves in the middle of a totally different mission. There are pieces of equipment that would have been incredibly helpful and effective for them to have that they don't have. And then there are other people that come in that are equipped for those missions, do have the training for the type of mission, and are just able to be more combat effective because of the different stuff that they have. So, but again, we're not talking about combat stuff because we're not allowed, because we weren't in the military.
We can't talk tactics.
And our beards don't count.
Nope, not at all.
But, the one thing that is interesting about all of the experience that you can get from, or rather all the information that you can get for books, it is not the same as experience, but it does prepare you to have better experiences, and it allows you to learn from your experiences. I have a theory that when you read books like this, you build shelves in your brain, and so then when you go out and you have experiences like this, you already have the shelves to put the experience that you're going to gather onto. It's already organized. You already have a place and a category for it. You already have studied communications, so when you're in a communications breakdown, you already have your list of things that you do to address that, and you know what the effects of a communication breakdown are going to be, and you can prepare yourself for those things. So
some people will say that experience is the only teacher, and the reality is experience is a rotten teacher. It's the most expensive way to learn. And there's some stuff like you should not ever learn by experience what stepping on a landmine is like. You should learn that in books or by from instructors or whatever. And this is kind of a silly example, but you should learn that ahead of time so you never have to learn it by experience. Plenty of people have already had that experience. You shouldn't need to have the wow, it sucks to get strafed by a little bird experience or whatever the case may be.
I thought you were going to go with the Princess Diana quote about landmines, but carry on.
No. So books are great. One of the challenges with books is finding good ones. And that requires discretion and discernment and the ability to look at it and go, is this a sound book? Is this good data that's actually going to help me? Because, when you pick up a military history book, whether it's something like 13 Hours or whether it's something like a book by John Keegan, who's a military historian, taught at...
Everywhere.
Well, no, he taught in the British equivalent to West Point. Anyway, I can't remember the name right now.
I think he's read everywhere. But
but whichever one it is, one of the goals of studying this kind of stuff is so that you can take lessons learned, observations from the book, and apply it into your own life and your own preps. And you're never going to be fighting the Battle of Teutoburg Forest ever again, right? Those Roman soldiers that did that, most of them died, but we're not having the battle.
They've all died since.
Most of them died in the battle, but we're not having the Battle of Teutoburg Forest again. But the thing is, some of those experiences that different forces and different times have experienced have parallels through history. Like I read Paul Revere's Ride and Battle of Black Hawk Down almost back to back, and the parallels between those two incidents are awfully striking. And then when you add into that mix the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, you're like, they're all basically the same kind of event that occurred. And while there are components to each of those that are utterly unique, and experiences that soldiers in Black Hawk Down had with falling out of helicopters, Paul Revere's guys didn't have, but some of those concepts would be familiar. If you had a veteran of the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, a veteran of Paul Revere's Ride, and a veteran of the Black Hawk Down incident, and they got together and they had a common language they could talk in, there would be things that they would understand about each other's experiences because they had lived a like experience, although separated by hundreds or thousands of years and entirely different equipment and wars and everything. But you can read these things and you can start to pick up and learn lessons. And I remember after reading 13 Hours, I had a couple different lessons. It's like, wow, they broke a lot of pairs of nods according to this book. And a number of the guys ended up towards the end of the battle with ears so blown out from gunfire that they could not really effectively communicate anymore. It's like those are two very practical things that I can learn from this book and go apply it to whatever it is I'm doing. Like ideally, I would have little foam earplugs on all my gear. And so in the event that I ever get drawn into a gunfight unexpectedly, I'll be set. I can pop those suckers in, and I won't just be doing just thousands of rounds of damage to my ears. Like there's things like that can be extracted, and this is where the problem comes in. There's books that have lessons learned that are the result of erroneous analysis or bad data. And I have encountered this so much in even well-respected military history books. You're reading it along, and it's not like who killed Patton. It's not that level of controversy. It's just like a simple fact that they just got wrong. Like I've read a number of books that talk about the Boer War, and they talk about the Battle of Spine Kop, which is basically Spy Mountain.
Famous battle. All YouTube commenters know about it. Chime in, YouTube commenters.
Right.
Yes.
And it's not at all racist to talk about because it was the British fighting the South Africans. But the Transvaal Republic. But there's military historians I've read who say, well, the British lost because they didn't make it to the top of the mountain. It's like, no, they did. Or it's like, well, they lost because they thought it was the highest mountain in the area, but it wasn't. It's like, no, it was the highest mountain. And there's
This stuff is really easy
like
to check.
you just go look at
guys.
Google Earth and you measure it. There's stuff like that that's super simple factual errors that are made in a lot of military history stuff.
And then they just sort of get repeated
And so
repeated and repeated.
anytime you pick up a military history book to read and glean from and learn, you got to approach it with some grains of salt. The grains of salt to approach something like this with is, you're getting into spook games with a book like this. I mean, that the CIA or whomever had to have had a role in reviewing this before it went to press.
And do you think maybe they had a role in like the preceding days?
Right, and so it's
And
like...
do you think maybe the State Department possibly had something to do with stuff?
Yeah,
And maybe
and
like
so-
the Secretary of State possibly? Like, we couldn't say who it is, of course, because that's like just impossible data to know.
But you got to approach this stuff with some grains of salt. You read the stuff, you evaluate it, you apply your own thought process to it, sift through it, figure out, is this credible? Does this make sense? Is this separately verifiable? All that kind of stuff. And you got to be a man who thinks.
Yes.
In the movie Liberty, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, there's a point where Jimmy Stewart gets really, really upset, and he storms out of the room and shouts, "No one fights my battles for me." And I've wanted a T-shirt, "No one does my thinking for me," because there's way too much of that in this world. People just want to take someone else's thoughts, latch onto it like a little limpet mine, and just
Know that
go
it's the
wherever
best.
it goes and not question or think about it at all. And nothing could be farther from the truth.
Another recommended book would be Bill Lind, Fourth Generation Warfare. I don't have a physical copy of it, but highly recommend it.
Yeah, smart guy.
Or William Lind, I think is his.
Well, he
how
goes
he's-
by Bill Lind. You interviewed him, right?
Yeah. So let's move on to some really specific stuff. Again, we're talking about stuff that will help people be combat effective or emergency management effective or just like generally more effective. Like wearing the right clothes when you go outside to check the mail. You'll be more effective at checking the mail if you have a long way to go. Just saying. So let's talk a little bit about food and water. Food and water is, I know everyone wants to talk about nods.
I get
and
grumpy when I don't have
radios
food, so it's a good idea to have food.
and water. So, and it depends on where you're at. So when we were living in Texas, Texas is a dry and dusty place where there is no water. And when you find water, you're going to find it generally not naturally occurring, but in places where it's hard to get to. So things like having Stillcock keys so that you can open up spigots and get at water certain places is sort of handy. Out here in Tennessee, there's water everywhere. Water is dumping from the sky even as we speak. But oftentimes it's very muddy because we've been getting, inches and inches and inches of rain all the time. So there's a life straw over there.
Yeah, and there's one of the good things is there's a lot more kinds of filtration technology, and Chad, you probably know about this stuff. You may be more current on it than I
we were
am.
talking about it right before the stream. So there's a bunch of things that are out there. I like Sawyer, but these were on sale and they haven't expired yet, so I have a bunch of them to hand out to people.
I don't know who started it, but there's this extruded tube filter technology that a bunch of people have started using, and it's made really high levels of high flow, high filtration possible at a really low price. So something like the Sawyer Mini can filter out protozoan cysts and bacteria, and it has a lifespan of like 100,000 gallons if you clean it properly.
Yeah.
And it's like $20.
Yeah.
And 20, 30 years ago, this technology just didn't exist. And I don't know who invented it or how it came about, but it did. And now a bunch of people are providing that. I was looking recently, Sawyer has this new filter that's kind of interesting. It has a sponge material that goes inside the water bottle that actually has the capacity to absorb and capture like heavy metals and pesticides.
Oh, interesting. And this is obviously, again, your location determines
Yeah.
what it is you actually, what is the threat that you were trying to remove from the
Yes.
water. Know that stuff and then pick accordingly.
Yeah.
There's places where heavy metals and pesticides not a huge issue.
But if
then
you're in
there's
farming
places-
country, potentially, big issue. So just a little bit of education combined with tools can go a long way. And one of the problems in the prepper community is people think, I just get the gear and now I'm all set. And
You got to understand the gear, and you got to practice
Right.
with the gear. You
Yeah.
got to know how it works, what it can and cannot do.
yes.
Yeah, and you can't read a prepper blogger from Texas that has one set of needs, live somewhere completely different, and just buy his gear and expect that it's going to work. Environmental stuff, weather stuff. I think you should have rain gear. Can you grab that space blanket over there? Space blankets, very useful. Space blanket ponchos. There's all kinds of really tiny, easy to carry stuff that will do things like stop you dying from hypothermia, which is kind of a thing. When we lived in New Zealand, okay, so survival training in New Zealand is kind of a joke because New Zealand is, I don't know how to
It
describe it.
it doesn't try very hard to kill you.
New Zealand is like a survival horror game with all the cheats turned on and all the monsters turned off. So if you just
There's
walk
like-
outside, the only thing that really kills you in New Zealand is potentially hypothermia if
Yep.
you're dumb. You can just wander around drinking water from perfectly clear mountain streams.
There's
You
nothing
can-
that will kill you. There's
no
like,
animals that will kill you, just beautiful little fantail birds fly down around you and are not afraid of you at all.
and they eat the insects around you.
You can
and-
drink your L&P and eat your burger rings and other naturally occurring New Zealand foods, and then lie down under a silver fern to sleep. Wake up in the morning.
Yeah.
Little kiwi birds have snuggled up to keep you warm over the night, you know. So I admit I haven't done useful American survival training in forever, and I was completely spoiled by it in New Zealand. So
Right.
yeah, I mean there are orcs, but you know it's really not much of an issue. So yeah. The things like space blankets, very careful, very, very useful for things, very easy to carry around. Think about the environment that
Right.
you're going to be in. New Zealand, ridiculously easy.
Yeah.
Tennessee, a jungle, for all intents and purposes. So know your environment and the threats that you might need to account for, and have some of this stuff ready for the basic missions that you're going to be undertaking. If it is search and rescue stuff, something more than flip-flops is probably what you want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Like, we're not combat vets, even if we do have beards.
People keep bringing up the
I
beards.
know. So, but the thing is, like, I've gone out multiple times, not just as a firefighter, but just as a neighbor, and helped, clear branches off the road after a storm. I have deployed one of these on the interstate as a firefighter. But yeah, when tools like this, if you're just trying to be a good neighbor, you're going to have a lot of potential opportunities to use them in your day-to-day life. And they won't come often, but they will come. And there will be that time when there's a tree down across the road and you need to get out of your vehicle and help clear it if you want to be a good neighbor. And so at that point, you should have the equipment with you, and that's something that you would deploy. So I'm a big advocate of having a lot of this stuff, not so you can be a crazy doomsday prepper, but just so you can be a good citizen.
Yeah, and a good neighbor.
Yeah.
This is another thing that's really important, as we were talking about force multiplication. Another really important one is when you actually multiply your forces. Like, if you're not the only guy on your block that has the capability to help neighbors, but all of your neighbors also have the ability to help each other when stuff happens, so much more effective than you being the only guy with an electric chainsaw and a few extra bottles of water and a radio to find out what's going on and batteries for your headlamp. Like,
That's not much of a plan. I mean, the whole multiplication of forces kind of requires that you start with forces, plural. In a lot of ways, that is the very greatest single multiplication of forces, is a network of people. I mean, really, political power flows out of groups of people. And large groups of people will have almost uncertain, without question, a lot more power than a small group of people. And that's where these things can actually help the small group leverage their power into something a lot more. But if you don't even have a group at all, and that's, again, one of the problems of the prepper community, there's this rugged individualism that exists. There's this idea that we're going to all be completely self-reliant. I need no doctor, nothing else. I'm going to do it all by myself. And it's just,
hide in a hole and come out when civilization has rebuilt itself by itself somehow.
I'm sorry, whether you like it or not, it's groups of people that get stuff done, broadly speaking, and it's not just individuals.
Which brings us to radios. Because for the most part, radios, they kind of work for talking to other people. Now,
Yeah, but that's where, again, you got to have those friends.
yeah. Now, I will say, before we get on to the topic of community and friends,
Yeah.
it is worth having other radios. So this is a shortwave radio. It will listen to AM, FM, shortwave, all kinds of stuff. This will not transmit, but it will listen to basically all the bands. It's
Yep.
the GP5 SSB from CountyCom. This is actually a really helpful thing for gathering intel. Intelligence is also a very important force multiplier, knowing what's going on and where.
Yep.
Huge deal. So having something like this for gathering intel, very important, but radios, very helpful for coordination. Making sure that people have watches so they can coordinate things based on time, and radios so that they can actually talk to each other. That
Very
is
helpful.
very important, and I know that everybody wants super awesome
Tactical.
encrypted tactical digital radios like this Hytera, which is actually, it is super awesome.
But-
it's incredibly
But
awesome.
what I tell people is, like, the reality is, so this is a $30 radio. You get 90% of the benefit of having radios get with this versus this.
This right here is a, I believe, when you buy these in packs,
$15.
$15,
Yeah.
$12 radio. I use this little UHF $12 radio way more often than I use my other radios because they charge off of USB. They actually have the same Kenwood/Baofeng port so that all my regular stuff works with it. But I can throw a couple of these in my glove box or anywhere. And if I just need to coordinate with somebody like, hey, on the other side of the building, I want you to see if this turns on or off when the breaker goes on. We use these all the time.
Yeah.
And the way that we program these radios is half of them are, I think, FRS channels because it's legal, because they're completely legal.
Well,
and
so
then
these,
the other half.
so these, ironically, probably might be FRS
No.
legal.
Shh. They are. All right.
This is an RT85 Retivis. I don't know. It's like $30, just FYI. I'm sure people are asking. It's supposed to be a solid contender to replace the Baofeng UV5R, but I haven't tested it enough to confirm or deny.
Yeah. So don't look down your nose at little tiny radios. It's actually super handy to, be doing something with a neighbor, like, pulling a car out of something with your winch and just being like, hey, I can't hear you over the sound of the storm. Just talk to me on this.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes radios that don't talk for 15 miles and aren't encrypted are actually the solution to the problem.
I saw someone ask, like, what do I do if I don't have a group? And that's a legitimate problem. But I'm going to guess whoever that was that said that is probably not actually alone. They're completely disconnected from everybody else in their immediate area. But I'm going to guess they're very far from being the only person with a certain mindset, with a desire to be part of a group. And we made some good contacts doing the volunteer fire stuff.
Yeah.
I would suggest that in most places, it's not always the case for sure, but in many places, that group of people are probably some of the same kinds of people you might want to make contact with. I would suggest that it's a great place to get some skills and training. I mean, once
and
you
get to know your local area. I learned far more about the county that we lived in the 1 year that I was doing that than all the other years.
Yeah, because it makes you go to all the random places, except they're not random. It's the ones where the trouble happens.
It's not random.
It's not random. Like, there's a reason 70% of car accidents that we went to, the drivers were uninsured. That wasn't the rate for the whole county,
It's a
by
weird
the way.
statistical anomaly.
Yeah, just the thing.
Yeah, we've
So-
seen a thing or two because we know a thing or two.
But I actually think that was a really, really beneficial experience for us both.
Yeah, for
Because
sure.
we got to do stuff and experience stuff.
And test a lot of things, and it was steep learning curve for some stuff. That's another thing. I was going to talk about tools.
Yeah.
We live in a rural area, so there are certain urban tools that are less useful to us than others, and yet everybody in a rural area has a car. So being able to do basic car extraction, even if you don't have all of the fancy stuff or the proper certifications, the ability to do that kind of thing is actually really, really helpful. If people are trapped in things, having the ability to cut through metal, should we get real specific? Not real specific. The ability to cut through metal or pry open things, really helpful, really handy.
Well, so the first, I don't remember if you were there, the first real car wreck I worked,
Was it the one where the Jaws of Life didn't work?
Yes, that one.
I actually remember that being almost all of them, but it was definitely the first one. That
Right.
was when I realized that I was always going to have a hacksaw blade
Yes.
with me all the time because the Jaws of Life often don't work.
And that's actually how we got the guy out in that case, because I say we. I remember standing back and watching older, more experienced firefighters do it, and then just me helping every once in a while.
Yeah.
And
That's how your first call
having
always goes.
and having just like, it does not compute. He's screaming. We're trying to help him. Every time we move him, he screams. We have to get. I can't. My brain cannot fathom. Like, I understood it intellectually, but when it actually came time to help get this person out, it was a serious mind bender.
Yeah.
But yeah, I also carry a hacksaw everywhere now. One of the most up and coming extrication tools is battery powered sawzalls, because they will cut through so much stuff so fast.
Now,
And-
because of that,
Yeah.
you might find yourself in a situation why you have to explain to law enforcement why you have a battery-powered sawzall, because apparently that's a thing that they sort of look out for now.
I think it's more angle grinders. Sawzalls generate less heat and sparks.
By the way, no criminals watch this stream, okay? Just like,
Look,
criminals honor no watching this stream.
If we have criminals, this is not the first time they've heard this stuff.
I don't know. I've experienced some interactions with criminals that showed me that, man, they don't even know the basics. But carry on. As reminds me of that Top Gear clip. Car thieves, stop watching this. And then,
Yeah.
yes.
So,
Sawzall sidecar coming soon? Is this possible? Yeah.
it would be cool. So yeah.
So tools. Tools are very helpful. Tools are very handy. Again, think about your mission, what you're trying to accomplish. Be a part of a community. That's really important. I mentioned getting to know the county and just sort of know my way around.
Yeah.
That's a really important, helpful thing. The ability to navigate and use terrain to your advantage if you are fighting, or the ability to get to where you want to go, regardless of whether you're fighting or not, is very important. So having maps is cool. A lot of people buy maps and then they
Fewer people know how to work off of a map.
buy the map, they put it in their bag. That's cool.
Yeah.
They buy a compass, they take it out of the packaging, they put it in their bag.
Yeah.
That's cool, but you don't want to do your first land nav course when you actually need to get somewhere in the dark, in the rain. So actually learn how to use this stuff. Now,
Yeah.
I would say it's worth having because possibly
You'll be with someone that does know how to use it.
it's very possible that you'll be with somebody that knows what they're doing and doesn't have the gear for some reason.
Yep.
It does happen. But let's talk real quick about GPS stuff. We have somewhere in this room of awesomeness, there is the wrist-mounted Garmin TREX that all the cool guys wear, and all the cool guys on the internet want to wear one because it's the cool thing. However, the distinctly less cool TREX is actually the superior device for most people because it actually shows you maps, and it actually does driving navigation, and it does hiking navigation, actually does stuff that the TREX, which is
Yeah.
awesome, doesn't actually do.
This one here, let's see if it boots up. Yeah, it's booting up.
That one is ancient. That's been,
We got this in like 2008.
it's been in like
And it's-
6 different countries, heavy use.
The adhesive is kind of rebonded.
I knew if we
outer
just let it
string-
rest, if we just let it rest for a year or two, it would be okay.
the rubber gasket around the side started coming off. But yeah, this thing is super cool.
Almost
It's lasted.
indestructible.
It lasted great.
Runs on AA batteries, has a micro SD slot so you can put your own map data on there. It's had the map data of, like I think I said, I think 6 different countries. I've used that as backup
Yeah.
or primary GPS for things.
Yeah.
The newer model is also really sweet. It is a little smaller, a little slimmer. It does topo maps better. It has a few more features, but a basic GPS that actually has map data and road data and topo data on
Yeah.
it that just works when your phone doesn't is hugely important. Although offline maps should also be on your phone.
Right. And actually, I was going to just say that. Like, I stopped carrying that because I started carrying CalTopo on my phone. There's a number of map programs that allow offline map access. And CalTopo is a paid program, but it's really, really awesome. It allows you to cache data offline. It has a lot of different kinds of map data.
My recommendation,
Yeah.
CalTopo is awesome. If you're doing GIS stuff, exploration stuff, it is
Yeah.
fantastic. If you're doing navigation stuff, Osmond is the Android version. I forget what the iPhone version is, but it uses open source map data for
Yep.
the roads. But it also does topo, and it also does hillshade, and it also does my favorite feature, Wikipedia offline articles.
Yeah.
A small percentage of Wikipedia articles have to do with geographic location, so they have GIS data in them. And Osmond lets you download all of that data that is geographically linked so that I can scroll over to like the Centerville Airport, and then I can read the offline Wikipedia article about the Centerville Airport that has information like length of runway and what the runway surface is and what sort of fuels are kept there. Whatever is in the Wikipedia article about the thing, I can see in my map data as I scroll around. I can scroll over to the Centerville Hospital and I can see what they've got there equipment-wise. So I find that to be a great tool when, and it works for navigation, road-based driving navigation as well. So like after Christmas, when the bomber that we never heard about ever again mysteriously blew up the AT&T building and there was basically no mobile internet around this part of Tennessee, you couldn't use Google Maps to drive around on the roads, but I had Osmond and I could do it. And I didn't have this guy. I hadn't bought this guy yet. But having the capability, having backups is really important, because one of the things that does happen pretty often and pretty regularly in the situations where people need help, it's usually because stuff is broken. Sometimes it's localized, sometimes it's not very localized, and a lot of stuff gets broken when some stuff gets broken. So yeah.
Most of you probably know this, but a lot of our infrastructure is not very fault tolerant. It doesn't take a lot to just break stuff, and even when they fix it really fast, being without internet for 10 hours is potentially very painful.
Well, and so many people are dependent upon internet services. Like, it is very easy, and a lot of people used to have Garmin navigation devices in their cars. Now that's all on phones, and it's
or built into the car.
99% of the time it is, there's people that have, my car has GPS data inside. It's technically garbage because my car is a Ford, and Ford does not know how to do any type of in-dash entertainment or navigation support whatsoever. And one of the first things that I discovered when I Googled my model of car to see how I could make it work was the class action lawsuit from all the people that had bought that car earlier and sued Ford over how bad it works. But it used to be that people had more offline stuff, and now so much stuff happens in the cloud and so much trust is placed on the internet. Just, have some backups, because it's a good thing to do.
Something that we try to do here at T.REX Arms is, as far as business systems, payment processors, banks, vendors, you name it, we try to have a backup for every single thing, or a way to mitigate the risk or whatever. That's kind of one of the areas that I work in here. And so it's not just like, have backups in case the phones go down. It's like, no, for us, it's have backups for everything. And I think that that's actually a very prudent and wise approach, not just for your preps, but for your life. It's kind of interesting when you go read, like Department of Homeland Security puts out these "Are you prepared?" manuals on how to be prepped. It's kind of interesting. The biggest preppers are the disaster management people. They're the biggest preppers I have ever met. The most paranoid, the most the sky is about to fall. It's going to fall any day now. And you hear about them doing stuff like, we should have paratroopers ready to drop down along the bridges along the rivers in this area in case the New Madrid fault lets loose. We need to drop paratroopers down there to assess whether the bridges need repairs or not in the first few hours of the disaster. Like, that's the level of thinking that some of these guys are doing.
Hey,
but they put out materials, some of them, on preparedness, and some of it is silly because it has things like, you might want to think about safety, but then they mention nothing about guns. But some of the other stuff they have,
you don't need guns. You don't need guns in America because you just don't need them. And you don't need guns in Afghanistan anymore because the Taliban is there to protect everyone, especially the women.
Right.
As requested by the American State Department.
Let's not get into that.
Osmond is on iOS, by the way, people are saying.
Yeah,
Osmond
but I don't know what it's
stands
called.
for Open Source Maps Android. iOS is still called Osmond.
Well, that's not confusing at all.
So let's carry on with some more equipment. In many ways, all of the force multipliers that we're talking about are technically backups. Like night vision is a backup for the sun when the sun is not around, like flashlights are a backup for the sun when the sun is not around.
Yeah,
in
so
some ways.
FYI, this is Gen 3 night vision. There's also Gen 2 night vision, which is serviceable. We sometimes get people asking, what's your recommendation for Gen 1 night vision? And that answer is quality flashlights.
Quality flashlight better than Gen 1 night vision.
Yeah, because
Yes.
you're going to...
Are you ready to talk about night vision? I mean,
We could.
so
I bought-
medical is
Yeah.
important, but medical should be discussed by a medical professional.
Yeah.
I will say
Neither
that
of us are.
There's a lot of stuff that can go wrong when you do field expedient guerrilla medicine. On the other hand, tourniquets are almost always a helpful way to stop blood from coming out of people. And you don't have to be a medical professional to
unless
know
it's
that you
the
need the
head.
blood inside of the person.
Like,
He needs his blood.
yeah. So a lot of, I would completely agree with Isaac. I've been on many scenes where I'm looking at a medical situation. I'm like, I got no clue what to do. I have zero clue. I never got any medical training. And typically it was like, well, we already have someone else there. They're working the patient. I've got nothing to contribute. I will go direct traffic or, whatever the scene required. But medical is one of those areas where the gear is important, but the skills are so crucial.
Absolutely, yeah.
But tourniquets are one of the rare areas.
And they're
tourniquets
weird.
are like aspirin or Excedrin. It's like, well, you just put it in and it starts doing its thing. And tourniquets, if you have
Don't eat them.
an arterial bleed, you put it on above, well up above the bleeding spot and tighten it down. And then maybe you put on a second one if the first one didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And they save lives like nobody's business. I'm so glad the medical community's opinion that they were dangerous has been changed. Because sometimes the medical community flip-flops.
Well, I wouldn't say sometimes. I would say it's the norm. But,
I'm glad we don't use leeches anymore.
you can find these natural, organic, free-range leeches that some of them have degrees, and they're very effective. So let's move on to lights and night vision. As David has already pointed out, a light is kind of a no-brainer force multiplier. A lot of force multipliers come with upsides and downsides. Medical equipment is one of those. Tourniquets are the rare exception
Yeah.
where having a tourniquet is super helpful. Having a tourniquet
Yeah.
on you will help you if the number of people that know about tourniquets now is phenomenal. So
Yeah.
part of the reason that I carry a tourniquet is if I get shot and fall down, the odds that somebody near me is able to say, he's bleeding and he has a tourniquet on him, I can take care of this
I can
problem.
do this
Even if
thing.
they're not carrying
Yeah.
a tourniquet, that number is shockingly high.
Yeah.
So tourniquets are great, but medical equipment is expensive and hard to use, and so the cost-benefit analysis there is a little harder to do. So is the case with night vision.
Yeah.
But flashlights are great.
Yeah.
Flashlights are phenomenally useful and cheap, and weapon lights, especially on rifles, are great. It's almost like a free buff that you get instantly.
Yeah.
You practice with it a little bit, you dry fire with it a little bit, you put the tape switch where your thumb already is, and now you have the ability to fight in the darkness, which is like 50% of the time on average. If you take the whole year into account, pretty much anywhere you go, it's half the time. So that's a huge force multiplier, being able to fight in twice as many times as you previously could.
I read this hilarious government report once, and it was saying that something more than 50% of gunfights took place in times of day associated with reduced visibility, which is their way of saying in the dark. But yeah, there's some things on this table where having the gear is only half the thing. You got to have the skills to go with it. And there's other things on this table where really almost no skills are required. Flashlights are one of those things. Tourniquets are one of those things. Very little skill or knowledge is needed. And armor is one of those things. Armor is one of those things that's totally passive. You put it on, and it is doing its job almost immediately.
We're now getting to the part of the stream that people have been waiting for this whole time. We've been talking about boring, old, helping people stuff, and that's no fun. We're now about to talk about combat equipment, which is, I think that's what the chat wants.
We're just posers.
Well, sure, but it's still fun to talk about, right? So anyway, you already brought up armor. Do you want to talk more in depth about armor, or do you want to talk about suppressors or more into night vision? Again, mission dictates gear.
Yeah.
While we're on light, I will say mission dictates gear. Everybody wants quad nods because those are the coolest of all the nods. More is always better. However,
Right.
for the price of quad nods, you could buy, I don't know, a small island in Tahiti, some widely used Afghani MRAPs. There's a lot of things that you could get for the cost of quad nods.
I'm really curious to know if there's going to start being used ACOGs popping up on eBay shipping from Afghanistan. And does
possible.
it count as buying stolen U.S. property? Yeah.
I
Never
think it's
mind.
more likely that a whole bunch of them are going to show up on Chinese e-commerce sites.
Yeah.
Up until now, all the e-commerce based Chinese sites have been selling knockoff ACOGs. Could be we're going to see some used genuine ACOGs on those particular sites at some point. And potentially night vision. Everybody wants night vision. Night vision is very cool. Night vision is legit a superpower. However,
So what someone else just referenced that's also legit and kind of a superpower is bug repellent.
correct.
Because it's super cool to go into the forest with nods. It's a lot less cool the next day when you come out and you are chewed to pieces and you spend approximately the next 2 weeks recovering from the chigger bites, etc.
And you have Lyme's disease.
And maybe you picked up Lyme's disease, or worse, the disease where you can't eat red meat anymore.
That
But
is worse.
yeah,
But so
Maybe.
yeah, there's a bunch
But-
of little miniature superpowers that are worth having in the jungle.
exactly. I'd like to make one or two really quick comments on flashlights. Surefires, Streamlights. There's some other brands like that, or that I put in the same kind.
Other brands like that. Go
Yeah,
on.
that are premium, high quality.
Yes.
You're not going to be disappointed.
There are other brands like that. Carry on.
Yeah, and but the biggest thing I would say is there's so much of this. Don't go cheap on your flashlights. And I would say some people would say Streamlight is cheap. I have had fantastic success with all of the Streamlights that I have tested. My last Streamlight, I carried it almost every single day, and after about 3 years, the clip broke. Still works perfectly. I just can't carry it in my pocket as easily anymore. And that's many drops. Cheap lights that you get off of Amazon are almost never going to be a good buy. They're not going to perform like they say they perform, and they're going to die really soon. Most likely it's going to be the switch that dies. Could also be the emitter or the driver board or something like that dies, but case in point, it dies. You don't want to skimp. You're going to pay $30-40 and up to get into solid flashlights. If you go buy those $3.50 little telescoping flashlights on Amazon, they don't last. That is not a good tool to bank on for a disaster scenario. So I'll just throw that out there.
Yeah, and I would say pistol lights undergo considerably more abuse than
Yeah.
rifle lights. So same deal,
Yeah.
more.
Yeah,
more
go
abuse.
go straight to. We've had. So I had always wanted to have this when I would look at gear. It's like, well, this one has these features, this product, but what's its reliability like? You know, reading through 10 Amazon reviews just tells me what those 10 individuals experienced. It tells me nothing about the sample size or anything else. And I wished,
Well,
I wish,
and
I
now
wish,
on Amazon they're all fake reviews.
right?
Now.
And I wish some manufacturer would actually share, like, what is our warranty rate? What is our, XYZ? And the thing is, now having T.REX and moving the volume of stuff that we often do, I can go over to Kyle at CS and be like, so how is Streamlight versus Surefire? And then he gives me answers saying, reliability, it's really good.
Yeah, you're not going to give numbers. You're just going to say reliability equals very good.
Well, I'm not going to quote numbers for a couple of reasons, and one of those reasons is I don't want to quote wrongly.
Sure, exactly. Our
but-
sample size is still small.
But let's just put it this way. I have Streamlights on all my rifles that have dedicated rifle lights, and my personal flashlights are all Streamlights.
All right. Well,
I have one or two Surefires, but the Streamlights are solid. If I was going to go play whack-a-mole with the Taliban in Tora Bora, I'd probably take a Surefire, but just because there's no resupply.
yeah.
But I'm far more likely to have one of my children lose my flashlight than to have to bludgeon zombie Taliban to death with it and have to then use it to illuminate something after I'm done.
Also, do not underestimate the humble headlamp.
Oh, yeah.
This is a Streamlight Bandit. I love this light because it is multiple brightnesses of red. Oh, yes. I should have been doing this before, guys. The anamorphic lenses. They're totally working. And let's see here.
It's not working as well anymore. Oh, there we go.
I also have 2 brightnesses of white light.
Yeah.
So I love this light. It is USB rechargeable, and you can see the individual emitters. Charles, can you zoom in so we can see the separation of the emitters? It's beautiful.
Oh,
Guys,
that is fantastic.
Where is J.J. Abrams? He would love what we are doing here today. It's good work that we're doing. So headlights are phenomenal.
Yep.
As cool as night vision is, a headlight is a better thing to use.
If I was going to go,
some of the time, a lot of the time,
a huge, I would say, as someone that owns some night vision,
some night vision, yes,
a headlamp is going to be more functional for most things. Like if I had to go up on my roof and fix it in the middle of the night, I would not do it with nods. Work on an engine, not nods. Nods are best when you need to be very, very stealthy, and most of the time that's not a requirement. Thankfully,
now, I would say
thankful
even
for
when
that
you're
fact.
trying to be very, very stealthy, let's switch to night vision. As far as force multipliers go, night vision is huge. It cannot be underestimated, but at the same time, it has a training barrier to it as well. So the number of times I've seen people put on night vision, assume that they are invisible, and then walk directly into a place where they are easily visible, it happens a lot. So the training is really important as you consider what it is your mission is, what your budget actually is. One of the things that I was hoping to talk about, but we're running out of time rapidly, is what your defense budget should be. So
yes,
a national defense budget is a certain percentage of GDP.
Or
You
it ends
as
up
a
being
person, you
Yes.
also have a GDP, and your defense budget can be a percentage of that. And it could be that your GDP does not actually support the acquisition of F-15s and nukes or quad nods.
yeah.
Now, I would also say that your mission is what it is that you want is very mission specific. So if you want quad nods are absolutely, no question about it, the best way to do night vision for room clearing at speed. Now, if you're not doing room clearing at speed, it could be that you don't need the extra weight and expense of quad nods. And
And for most people, room clearing is not really going to be a thing they do unless they're doing it on the government dime.
try not to do room clearing as
Yes.
the aggressor.
Yes.
Little rule of thumb.
Right. It is such a last-ditch thing. It's interesting, the Israelis, although it's very racist to talk about them, because they are a race,
I love where this is going already. Please continue.
they, one of their practices for a long time was they would not, if there was a terrorist holed up in a house, they wouldn't go in there. They just bulldoze the house.
You mean kill-dozer the house?
I guess. And various U.S. military units have done the exact same thing. If at all possible, you do not go in there. You just drop a JDAM on it, or you fabricate an improvised explosive and take down the structure, whatever.
I think I actually learned that from a John Wayne movie where he was like, no, we're not going in there. We're just going to set the house on fire. They'll come out if they want, and we'll shoot them then.
Yes.
That sounds like a John Wayne quote.
Yeah.
But there's other things that you could use night vision for. And one of the things that so this is the Psionics Aurora. As far as night vision goes, it's digital, so it's really a completely different animal than analog night vision. And it's almost impossible to compare. So sensitivity-wise, it's a little bit under Gen 2, but it does some other stuff like it is color. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that it lets you do is it's really easy to tell when you're looking through it whether you are looking at visible light or whether you are looking at infrared light, which is something that analog night vision doesn't tell you. It doesn't tell you what that particular light source is. But in this case, you can tell if you look at people walking along wearing this night vision or looking through this night vision, you can see if they have visible headlamps or whether they have IR strobes.
Yeah.
Very quickly, you can differentiate that. And so
that is a very cool feature.
It's a very cool feature that is very useful. The lag, the digital latency on this makes it not great for helmet mounting. There's people who do that and you just walk slower and move smoother and not get seasick. But
maybe they walk slower anyway.
It's possible. It's very, very hard to move quickly wearing night vision without a whole lot of training. But once you have some night vision capability, you can use it for a lot of other tasks that are not the high-speed, low-drag stuff. And even something like the Psionics Aurora, which is not good for helmet mount, and the sensitivity is not on par with Gen 3, and it's even not on par with Gen 2, still does some stuff that Gen 3 and Gen 2 doesn't do.
Yeah.
It also has a digital compass and GPS built in, so it does the same thing that for TREX GPS that we couldn't find does. So
Yeah.
think about your mission and what it is that you're actually trying to accomplish, because it could be that you don't actually need to spend 50% of your GDP on quad nods.
Right.
You could actually do something else for the same force multiplier benefit. But we should talk about body armor, because night vision is expensive and hard to use. Body armor is a great force multiplier, but where you get that buff almost immediately.
Yeah. We get a lot of questions about body armor in our CS department. A lot of people are trying to figure out how much protection to buy, what's needed. They want level 4 or whatever. And body armor has always been a conundrum because you have this relationship between 3 points. You have the cost of the armor, you have the mobility of the armor, and you have the protection level of the armor. And you cannot adjust these different points without adjusting the other points. And so if you want epic protection at a super low price, get sandbags, but your mobility is going to go to 0. If you want very high mobility and very high protection, it's going to be very, very expensive. And this relationship between these 3 points has existed since time immemorial.
You look back through woolen armor, leather armor, all the same constraints.
Yeah, you look back through military history, and what you find is pretty commonly about 3 main tiers of armor. You have your budget armor, you have your intermediate armor, and you have your elite armor. And that's kind of how it always has been. And recent history broke all that, because we got to the point where even the weapons of the lowest private could defeat the highest armor, and armor died almost completely. There was no military armor, there was no body armor for cops, because there was no armor. There was no material that could withstand the force that was still mobile, that would withstand the forces of a rifle bullet, or even maybe a pistol bullet.
And people did, minimal kind of armor.
Yeah,
shrapnel and things like that.
But it wasn't until much more recently with synthetic materials that armor came back again. Mm-hmm. But going back through military history, they always had armor practically. I mean, the Egyptians didn't really, but pretty much since the Battle of Kadesh on, you start seeing people wearing armor. But it's always, there's these 3 factors that they're trying to control and adjust. And maybe they increase mobility by shrinking the amount of protection that's offered, or maybe they go for a custom suit of armor for a knight that is made just for his exact body, and that's how you get maximum protection, maximum mobility, but the price is through the roof because it's a handmade garment of steel, effectively, and that's the challenge. And so once you kind of start to understand that there is no free lunch in the world of armor, you have to compromise on something. Then it will allow you to start approaching it a bit more realistically.
Yeah.
The reason, when I was reading through the HESCO materials and I was looking at all their products and researching them, the reason I settled on the L210 was, to me, it seemed like such an amazing compromise of those 3 concepts. Mm-hmm. Nice low price, lightweight, and good protection against all common threats. Or nearly all common threats. And apparently a bunch of people, that saw the listing on the internet agreed with us. That's an M210, which is a new and interesting product. This is an L210.
Pretend like you didn't see that,
Pretend
you guys.
that you did not see. I could literally be wearing that right now and you probably wouldn't know. But the L210 is just an amazing compromise between those 3 points that just hits a fantastic combination. If you don't have a ton of money, you probably shouldn't spend a ton of money trying to get a higher level of protection or a higher degree of mobility. You should probably go with something more budget. And there's a really interesting example of this actually in military history. There was the, what was it? Was it the Assize of Arms, 1183, I think it was. There was this law passed by the king at that time. I think it was like an Edward, I can't remember. And it basically laid out a framework for weapons ownership. It's sort of like a Second Amendment on steroids. I've mentioned it in some other materials before. Mm-hmm. But it's very interesting because it mandated ownership of weapons. And it identified 3 classes of freemen you have knights, and then you have freemen with a worth, I think it was above 16 marks, and people that had a worth less than 16 marks. And it had, a knight must own one set of knight equipment. And then this guy, he's got to own this level of armor and this weapon. And this guy needs to own a higher level of armor and another weapon. And so, we kind of have the same thing in our society, but we have people in different income brackets. And if you're in this income bracket, you don't need to be ashamed about it or anything, but you're not going to be able to buy a set of knight armor, probably. I'm not going to say you can't at all, but
well, it's kind of different now where the cost of knight armor at the time was like a fighter jet today, obviously.
More like M1 Abrams.
M1 Abrams. Okay.
Yeah, the cost of a fully equipped knight in inflation-adjusted dollars, pounds, whatever. Yeah. I'm sorry.
I mixed up the inflation
now.
Figures from the 1360s. I forget. Yes.
Right. A fully equipped knight was like $3 to $5 million, which is about on par with a.
But that does something above and beyond what armor does. We're at the point where armor has become a lot more democratized, where even the most expensive body armor is still cheaper than mid-range nods.
Yeah. That's actually one of the most interesting things about all this is the way that mass manufacturing, robots and stuff like that have allowed some of this stuff that otherwise would have been very, very expensive to just come way down in price. Mm-hmm. You can now get super effective armor at a really low price, all things considered.
And one of the neat things about it, there's so much stuff that we kind of missed. We didn't talk about suppressors. We didn't talk about mobility, electric dirt bikes, and cool stuff like that. But when it comes to armor, one of the really cool things about armor is that of all of the force multipliers on the table, especially the combat ones, this is one of the best to add because it doesn't change. The weapon lights and the armor are the easiest to add, give you the most bang for your buck, and have the least downsides. You don't have to change, like with a suppressor, you might have to change your ammunition. You might have a slightly more finicky weapon system once you have the suppressor on there. You probably have to retrain a little bit if you have been doing stuff around barricades without your zero's going to shift. Yeah, like there are things that you have to do when you add certain force multipliers to your loadout. But armor is something that is, especially the modern stuff, relatively low impact. All you got to do is start wearing it and keep doing the training that you were doing, and you get there.
Well, I'd like to make a point here. So, as a military historian, I'm very interested in the development of. I'm an amateur military historian. I don't do it professionally, but I'm very interested in the development and adoption of equipment over time. This is part of why I find the Arab-Israeli wars interesting. You go from World War II to modern times with a war about every 10 years. And you have this, the Soviet Union and the USA using participants in the war as proxies to test out their latest and greatest tech. So you can see it develop over time really well. But armor is interesting because, like I said earlier, it was a thing that everyone had. And then as gunpowder took over, you could get armor that was proof against pistol ball and stuff like that. And actually armor of the time would sometimes be tested against a proof round and would have that dent from the pistol ball. And it was like, yep, proof tested, that's good armor.
Slightly less comfortable than if it hadn't been, but
now it's safe. But then as centerfire cartridges and stuff took off, it just died. Armor completely died. And one of the
you occasionally see weird prototypes, but those are the exception rather than the rule. The weird prototypes demonstrate how people were working on this and it just wasn't working.
But it went from being everyone had some kind of steel armor or something in like the Middle Ages and stuff to nobody had it, with the exception being like German machine gunners in World War I that had this, really clunky clip-on piece for their helmet and maybe a breastplate because they got behind their giant machine gun and stuff. But the really interesting thing is we're going through a change, and I think it's just the logical extension of a sea change in thinking that's already occurred. Mm-hmm. So when I was a little boy, handguns were the number one target of the gun control movement. There was no good reason for people to have handguns. You could get arrested just for having one if the cops didn't like you and stuff. It was a mess. And in the last 30 years, it's completely changed. The handgun carry permit movement has just totally changed the landscape. People now accept the concept that individual people have a right to self-defense, and handguns are the way they do that. But once people start on that track of thinking, it's like, well, if I'm going to have a handgun, I want the most handgun I can possibly have. I want
10 millimeter.
I want a Glock 17 with 17 rounds of ammo and a weapon light and a red dot, because I don't want just a tool. I want the best tool for this purpose. And then the next extension of that thought process is, I need a rifle. And I don't just need a rifle or a pump-action shotgun. I need an AR-15. I need what the cops and the military use.
I mean, it is the best all-around, best bang for your buck, most reliable, most accurate,
Just
most
it is
capable thing.
the weapon system with the most development of any weapon probably in the history of the world is the AR-15 platform. Maybe not any weapon system, but any gunpowder weapon. That's what Ian of Forgotten Weapons says. So
No, I think that's correct. I was about to
that's
say,
not my analysis. That's his.
flintlocks were fielded for 200 years, but there wasn't so much ongoing development. And yeah,
But the
I
thing
think
is,
AR-15s for sure.
And the thing is, I remember before Obama, AR-15s were not a commonly owned weapon. I mean, they weren't super rare, but it would be like, he has an AR-15. And you were kind of worried that you'd be on a government list because you had an AR. You must be some crazy prepper. And then Obama came in, and I remember the headline on Drudge, it was like, Walmart sells out. And that was when the AR-15 went absolutely mainstream and everybody was on board. And you almost couldn't be an American gun owner without owning an AR-15. That's how common they became.
Practically couldn't have an Instagram page without an AR-15 to have pictures of.
And
on it.
I think we're on the cusp of having the same thing with armor, where the next logical extension is, man, I'm having trouble with that word. If you're gonna have gear to protect your life in the event that things go screwy, and if you're gonna have a rifle because things might be really screwy and you really want the best possible tool, then why wouldn't you up armor yourself? Mm-hmm. And traditionally, the American gun-owning public has tracked the American law enforcement public, community. So when cops carry revolvers and pump guns, that's what all the citizenry get to protect themselves. When cops adopt Glocks and AR-15s, that's what the people jump on board with as well. And you know what cops have been on board with for the last couple decades? Armor. Now, it's been hard for civilians to get armor, partly because it was so expensive, and partly because a lot of manufacturers would not sell to the public. You had to have a Mill or Leo ID in order to buy from them.
And
but
partly because there was a lack of information. But
yes,
that's
it was
another
snake oil
massive
territory.
change.
And that's part of why we wanted to get into it, to provide information and data behind what's going on with this stuff and how it works and why it's important. But last year we saw it start to change, where large numbers of people wanted armor. And you can see it, this is really interesting, you can see it in Antifa protests. Something like 1 in 5 Antifa type, let's say, tactical geared liberal protesters, maybe that's a better way to say it. Something like 1 in 5 is wearing some sort of LBE or plate carrier, which may or may not have plates in it, I don't know. But I think we're in the middle of a change, and it's not surprising at all, because people are just seeing, it's like the free market. When people see a good value, they all jump on board with it. And everyone has smartphones because it's a good value. It's a good way to use your money to make your life better. It's an excellent tool, and I think the gun community is starting to see, yeah, everyone should have body armor. I remember reading on some forums, and I remember seeing people watching the riots go down. They're like, that's it, I'm buying body armor. I never thought I needed it before. Mm-hmm. And I talked with people in the firearms community that worked in the industry, and they had the exact same statement to say. So as a military historian, I'm very interested in this development. Mm-hmm. But it's super predictable, in my opinion, and it makes tons of sense.
Yeah. Yep. So, and that's I think a very encouraging trend. So, out of all of the force multipliers we've talked about, armor is the easiest one to acquire. It's the next logical extension after you have lights on your weapons, after you have a long gun to do your fighting with. Probably need some load-bearing equipment in order to make the plates work. You can duct tape them onto yourself, sorta, kinda. It works.
I've wanted to get 2 heavy-duty shopping bags, like plastic ones, and tie the handles together and put plates in it and just
you could do the IKEA
flop
plate
it over.
carrier.
Yeah, but
we're not gonna talk about plate carriers and load-bearing equipment. That can be leaked in a future stream. But one of the things that we should do,
I think we can say there's going to be movement on that front in the near future. Movement in a big way. Let's just leave it at that.
Kyle. Oh, he's a guy's getting home. It's fine. Carry on. I don't. Think he's
Don't ask any questions. You'll see it when it happens.
Yeah. So one of the things that we need to do, you really need to make a video about the history of armor and some of the armor basics, because what you just touched on, I think, is a fascinating point. But of all of our force multipliers, I think one of the most interesting things is the body armor and the radio, and yeah, we didn't get into mobility. I have an electric bike. I'm starting to do more research on this front. We got some overlanding guys here. We should probably talk about some overlanding stuff. But yeah, mobility matters.
Right.
Wars are won often by terrain and being in the right place at the right time, which you need maps for. But you also, you know,
To the people in the comments, we'll get there when we get there. Okay? Don't be like the little kids in the car that just pester, are we there yet? And you're like, it's been 5 minutes since the last bathroom break. No, we're not there yet. But, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, thank you very much for watching this live stream. Go out and be fruitful and multiply your forces over the weekend. My recommendation to you guys is body armor. If you don't have the means to get into body armor, you don't have the load bearing equipment quite yet. Good things come to those who wait. Make sure that your fighting equipment, your handguns, are equipped with the best in holsters. What is the best holster right now? Is it like, does Works make it, or 10 core, Black Arch?
I think it's ours.
Oh, it's Filster. Yeah. No, Filster's awesome.
If you need active retention, it's Safari Land.
And if you need active retention, it's Safari Land. Those are some great holster recommendations. And then we make holsters in the back of the shop. We also make holsters.
It's just this thing we do.
It's true. We make holsters. So get yourself a holster. I was going to say, the ability to carry and conceal equipment is force multiplying, because then you have that equipment with you when you need it. So make sure that you can carry your gear with you, carry your gear on you. Make sure that you can use your gear in difficult circumstances like darkness, and then be ready for difficult things happening, like being hit by projectiles, and have some medical equipment on you so you can help others. Get yourself some tools. But most of all, the most important thing is really think about what it is that you're trying to accomplish.
Yep.
And get some information so that you are better prepared for the experiences when you have the opportunity to gain knowledge from those experiences. The more that you can prepare before the experience, which is a good but expensive and harsh teacher, is really important. So I really appreciated that point that you made earlier.
Yep.
And yeah, check back next week for another live stream. And hopefully, now that we've got some stuff getting accomplished and off of our plates, we can make some more videos about mobility and body armor and night vision and navigation and radios and other projects that have been happening behind the scenes.
And some of these things we need to get more educated on before we can talk about it.
Oh,
because,
absolutely.
You know, we are not fitness gurus. It would be foolish for us to act like we are.
We're not survival experts. We've been talking about VHF and UHF radios. We haven't talked much about HF radios. There's a really good reason for that.
Yeah. And I'm not teaching a land nav class because I don't know what I'm doing with that.
A lot of people asking about drones. Drones are force multipliers, but my drone is in Turkey right now. It's actually on a mission. So
it is? Oh.
That's actually true. I still recommend my Parrot drone. That's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next week, and new audio-only podcast at the T.REX Talk podcast on Monday. So check that out and sign up for our newsletter so you can find out about all the stuff that we weren't leaking in this video at all.